time. Hey, second time's the charm. Okay, are we live, machine? Yeah, well, I just sat here for about 3 minutes waiting for it to go live. But let's get to it. Welcome to today's D&December video. I'm Patrick, and we are going to have some fun tonight because I'm going to talk about some things that I know a little bit about because Lars and I have been on the edge of it for a little bit and enjoyed it. But let's talk about D&D movies. Now, I hadn't seen a lot of movies in the early days. In fact, it took many years before I got to the movie that I'm going to talk about the most in this video. Some of these I've never seen, especially not the early ones, like back in the early 80s when there was this D&D satanic panic, because there were demons and devils and things that were evil in Dungeons and Dragons. And that means as soon as the kiddies play one game, they're going to hell. Yeah, that. The most famous of which is the idiotic Mazes and Monsters, where the kid suddenly believes he's going to cast spells. He can fly off the World Trade Center. Oh, yeah, that was Tom Hanks, folks. Tom fricking Hanks did that. That was fun. It actually warmed my heart. The cockles of my heart. Even down in the subcockle region. You know that reference. Okay. But yeah, a lot of the 80s stuff was terrible and bad. Just in this mold of D&D will corrupt your soul. Which, of course, the ultimate end of that was Jack Chick and the Chick tracks, where, of course, the saving power was Jesus was the only thing that was going to save you from going to hell because you played role-playing games. They made it into a movie eventually. Luckily, the people who made it into a movie happened to also be a good number of the people that made a little movie later called Gamers Dorkness Rising. Yeah, a good chunk of those people showed up in the pretty much faithful adaptation of the Chick track with Jack Chick's blessing. Search for all this. It's hilarious stuff. And of course, Hollywood tried to get into the act with some D&D like movies, and they wouldn't get anything that was really awesome fantasy, except maybe early on the Conan movies, and then later on, of course, Lord of the Rings. But they did make a Dungeons and Dragons movie, a big screen version. It starred Jeremy Irons and some others, and one of the Wayans brothers, who you were glad to see die. Spoiler alert, this movie sucks. Or if you like excessive ham, yeah, this is insulting Islam levels of ham. That's how bad that D&D movie was. On the plus, the scepter that controls dragons became the artifact that's at the very center of my Dragons of Hadron campaign. Because why not? Because even a shitty idea, even a shitty movie can produce a good idea. Or at least something that you can build a good idea around. But of all the movies that came before it and the many movies, including Dead Gentleman, Zombie Orphan Entertainment's follow-up movies and spin-off movies and other related movies, and even the prior movie simply called The Gamers, which is a fun watch and amateur as shit. The best of the best from beginning to end, and probably the most accurate representation of gaming at the time. And this was around the 3.5 because that's the manual they were actually using in the movie, was Gamers Dorkness Rising. Now, I actually have met most of the main actors in this film, and they're all really interesting individuals. Christian Doyle's the weirdest of the weird, and he's awesome. And all the others are good too. I think we at Red Shirt Geeks, we've had a couple others from the movie on for actual interviews back in the day. So that's awesome. But if you're not familiar with this movie, let me just give it a breakdown. The primary character in the movie is a guy by the name of Lodge. He's trying to write a module for D&D, and he has a game group of those guys. Yeah, that guy times 3. Um, basically, they not much for role playing. They're murder hobos. One of them is rules lore extraordinaire. One of them's, well, he plays a chick. Yeah, exactly that. They can't get anybody to join their game, and they keep dying in a module. So of course they get somebody else to game, and they bring a girl into the gaming world with all of the requisite mockery of how stupid women are portrayed at the time. Thankfully, in D&D, this has gotten a whole lot better as we've gotten to 5e and Critical Role, and all D&D has finally become not this hobby thing that happens in basements with kids and sweaty guys and people who are on Stranger Things. Needless to say, they have an adventure. The woman who's brought in is, of course, the best role player and elevates the story, and there's a little bit of romance that develops, expanded on later movies. And basically, they all learn how to role play rather than just go and murder hobo the living shit out of everything. And it's probably the best example of people playing a role-playing game and how insane things can get and how hilarious things can get, but with an actual story versus Gamers Dorkness Rising, it's got a little bit of the meta story, but it's mostly the adventure. This is half and half, and really tells, if you wanted to sit somebody down and say, this is what role-playing games are really like. Also bikini male and a broadsword. And feats that were invented just for the movie. Although I've actually seen the module based on the movie, and boy, the feats are broken. It's lovely. But this film, above all others, kind of said, this is what I want D&D to be. This is what I expect out of D&D, and this is what I've seen in D&D. And it's probably the most honest movie about it. Whereas you get a lot of other movies I've seen are really good movies. They incorporate the role-playing, but it's not about the role-playing game necessarily or the people of how they play. It still has those elements, and it's important to the story, but it's more of a story about these people. What happens in the game is in service of that. Whereas this, it's half and half. Now, I would absolutely recommend to anybody that is in gaming that hasn't seen it or doesn't know what gaming is about, and they may have seen or even they may have heard of or seen Critical Role, or their exposure to Dungeons and Dragons is memes, and maybe they had fun and looked up the old D&D cartoon, which is an awesome cartoon for what it is. It's different. But if you want them to know what it's like to be at the table, there's the game. Because it will pretty much cover most of what you're going to encounter at the table. Somebody who's trying to metagame, somebody who's trying to rules lawyer, the chaotic neutral person who's pretty much chaotic evil, how lawful stupid bards can be. Not bards, I'm sorry. Paladins, not bards. The bard, on the other hand, is a horny bard. He literally rolls charisma to score with everything in the world. You come to think of it, the one guy who's playing a chick and the chaotic neutral sorceress chick and the bard managed to try to hook up before the game even starts. So the games begin. Let's go bone. So the games begin. Let's go bone. Yeah. Plus, suck. I know, because my one kid